Assalamu alaikum, guys. Welcome to Muslims for Progressive Values. I'm your host, Kendra Cordova, and today we have another installment of these wonderful classes from the Progressive Islam curriculum from MPV. We're going to be doing the second half of Unit 3, which is over hermeneutics. I'll give us a definition of that again just a sec if you didn't see the last class. Um, if you're into Muslims for Progressive Values or understanding progressive interpretations of Islam and things like that, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're looking for a great place to put that zakat money that is going to go to a good cause, MPV is a great place to donate. You can go to mpvusa.org. So today we're going to be getting into the feminist hermeneutics of the Quran. And the hermeneutics is just a fancy word that, you probably haven't heard just in your daily life. It basically just means rhetorical analysis of a theological text. So a theological text being like the Quran or the Bible or mythology texts of, older pieces, whatever that is. A text that people use as like a religious doctrine or, the stories of their faith. And you're just doing a rhetorical analysis of that, meaning you're going to take the words and try to understand what it meant. So before we get into the little lesson, I want to say two things really quick. The first one is that I noticed when I went back on the last video, because we were talking about Amina Wadud and some other like female scholars and things like that. I talked about Adi Studiria, and I accidentally said that he was a she while I was talking about him because I was stuck on the other one. So he is a he, and he has some really great pieces. I actually just went on to New Age Islam, which is a whole website where they have articles from different scholars on progressive Islamic topics and metaphysics and all that fun stuff. And it's so funny because just like 2 months ago, he just posted, actually, I didn't even know he's one of the contributors there, but he just posted a scholarly article on the limits of Quranic scriptural reasoning. So he actually talks about the hermeneutics in there as well. So if you want more information on that, you should go check out his piece on New Age Islam. The second thing I want us to get in the mindset of as we go forward is I want to break it all the way down to very basic concepts. I was reading to my kids the other day, and we were reading some Dr. Seuss, and one of his stories, The Zacks, it's not as popular as like, The Cat in the Hat, or Green Eggs and Ham and all that, but The Zacks is a really great piece. And it's just a short little short story about two Zacks, as they're called. They're like these furry little monster creatures. And they run into each other in the Prairie of Prax. And what happens is one is a north-going Zax and one is a south-going Zax. So they're going in these opposite directions and then they stop in front of each other. And now they're like stuck, right? And so one of them is like, hey, you got to step to the side so I can get through and continue on my path. And the other one is like, no, you're in my way. You need to step to the side so I can continue on my path. So you have these two opposing sides, really, and they're not going to wiggle at all to allow each other's existence to exist. And one of them at the end says, I will stand here if the whole world stands still. I'm still going to be here and I'm not going to move from my position. And, it ends with saying, well, the world didn't stand still. The world moved on, and they ended up building an overpass over these Zacks that are apparently still standing there to this day, refusing to budge. So I absolutely loved that piece when I saw it because it reminds me so much of some of these um, scholarly debates people will get into where they will have their view and the other person will have a view. And instead of just like agreeing, we don't fully align, we don't really align on a lot of stuff, but like you go your way, I go mine kind of thing, what happens is they'll just stand there and be like, no, this is unacceptable. My way is the only way, and I'm never going to do anything different. And then they get stuck. So we're going to talk about here today the hermeneutics of feminism and sort of the way that we can take these old texts, these ways that people have done it forever and ever and ever and ever, and the world is continuing to grow and live, to maybe see like, okay, well, we're in this time now. We've learned new things. We have come into contact with more people than we had previously, and we have science and the physics of the universe, all of this stuff to take into consideration as we look at our texts. So how do we even do that? In the last class, we did look at just hermeneutics in general. The second part of today's lesson is over the core values and sort of how we can do a textual analysis there. But the first part here, like I said, is we're going to take a look at a feminist hermeneutics. A lot of people think that the concept of Islam and feminism are not compatible, which is not true. But it does happen, right? We do see that seem to come about where all of a sudden feminism is talked about like it doesn't align. So we're going to talk about how it really does and how we can make sure that it does as we go forward. So, the Islamic hermeneutics movement, as we understand it today, initially emerged in the 20th century in response to the normalization of rigid Islamic regimes and the regressive policies associated with these regimes. So, again, we're talking about the Zaks. They're like, this is the way it is, period. Nothing budges, nothing moves, nothing changes ever, forever, right? And again, we're not saying change Islam, but you know, there are a lot of ways to interpret and understand texts that are nuanced and take the whole world into account here, right? So what happened was you had, all these like rigid systems. And so the hermeneutics movement was like, hey guys, let's learn interpretation through all of these nuances now. Key moments in the feminist hermeneutics movement specifically started in the 1950s. Aisha Abdul Rahman begins undertaking Quranic exegesis under the pen name Bint al-Shati, which is the daughter of the riverbank. So this started in the 1950s. We have some stuff going through the 1970s, 80s, 1990s. The 1990s was, we talked about last time, Amina Wudud's Quran and Women is published, proposing a gender-inclusive approach to the Quranic exegesis. 2002, Believing Women in Islam by Asma Barlas. I think we talked about her at some point as well, is published, offering historical and hermeneutical arguments for a feminist reading of the Quran. And we also have 2009, the publishing of the Sublime Quran, a gender-neutral translation of the Quran, was published. So that's 2009. We're going to talk about gendered language here in just a minute as well. That really plays into the way that these sort of like rigid, hypermasculinity readings and implementations come about, right? So, in recognizing this, the movement came to believe that any interpretations of the text that support inequality between men and women are simply incorrect human interpretations of the text. Now, at the end of the day, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, all interpretations are going to be human interpretations, period. We are humans, we are the ones interpreting it. So, is there a perfect interpretation? There's no such thing as a one size fits all interpretation, and there's no such thing as a truly perfect interpretation because what might fit in one, situation doesn't fit in another. We're talking again about that tomato of wisdom, right? Knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put the tomato in your fruit salad, right? So this, you might have figured out a way that this can work really well in this one situation. But as we come through each time, each changing situation, each person's perspective and whatever's going on, the interpretation is going to shift, and that's okay. That's the way it was supposed to be here. So we need to understand that even if we follow an interpretation and we think it's like the best way to do it and whatever, at the end of the day, it is still a human interpretation, and humans are going to make mistakes, period. Muslim women reading Islamic texts for themselves helped with the reinterpretation of them according to their lived experiences. I talked about this in our last class on hermeneutics. So we need more diversity within our scholars because if you train and ask the exact same types of people with the exact same experiences, you're always going to get the exact same answer. Not because it's right, but because it's a like an appeal to tradition of sorts here, right? Or an appeal to the larger population where it's like, well, this is how the people I know do it, therefore that is the only way to do it because, well, that's what he said and that's what he said. And you're like, well, yeah, but you guys grew up in the exact same place and situation. Of course, you're going to have the same answer, right? So when we get more female scholars out here, when we get more queer scholars, when we get more scholars from various cultures and cultural sections of the world, then we can really see sort of the beauty of Islam in that it is meant for all people of all times. But that doesn't mean that it's like a cookie cutter, right? It's that it has this beautiful diversity. That's actually one of the problems in a lot of the uh, current uh, view of mainstream Islam is that they'll forget that Islam already right now is very diverse, right? If you grab a Malaysian Muslim and a Chinese Muslim and a Saudi Muslim and a Canadian Muslim and all of these other Muslims, they're not gonna look exactly the same, and there's gonna be some difference in the interpretation and the practice as well. Again, not that we're saying to change Islam, but that Islam itself is made to be interpreted through time as we learn more about God by learning more about the world. So, uh, yeah, this helps women to get to say, well, this is my experience, and this is how the Quran must be talking to me. A lot of times when we look at the Quran, we think, it's talking to men. That's because that gendered language, we're going to talk about it in a minute. It's important to take like a woman's um, view of it. A great example is the section in the Quran that talks about how two women, needing to testify legally instead of just one man. A male's interpretation of that is often that women are half as smart or half as important or half as honest, right, as a single man. When in the feminist interpretations, they often say things like, women have another woman with them to make sure that they are not abused or coerced, right? Because women have a history of being um, attacked, abused, used, um, threatened, right, into agreeing with a certain thing. And so, like, there's power in numbers and that kind of stuff. So, having women come out here and share, this is what we see when we read this, what we feel, what we experience, really helps to bring in that diverse perspective. Feminist hermeneutics is the process of interpreting the Quran in the interest of women, the interest of women. How can we care about and focus on the freedom and the education and the well-being of women, right? In particular, the constant dehumanization that women face because of patriarchal interpretations of religious texts is something that they really want to focus on here, right? Because when we look around the world and we see where we have high numbers of female like aggression, abuse, domestic abuse, um, child marriages, all of that. Oftentimes, the people there will claim that they're doing it because of this certain Quranic interpretation. So we need to make sure that we are allowing women to take a stand here, scholarly, and be able to say this is wrong. And I'm going to not just say it's wrong because I said so, but they're going to be able to come out here and do their own interpretations of these texts as well. So, progressive hermeneutics in practice, Muslims for Progressive Values, who spent nearly 2 decades advocating against the practice of child marriage. This is one I just talked about, right? Um, this is often because of corrupted hadith, and then misinterpretation of, with the patriarchal exegesis of the Quran that contributes to it. For example, the examples that is used all the time is the age of Aisha. Some of the interpretations and way that it was lined up says that Aisha was a child bride. And so people will take that and then they'll say, which means that we can marry children. And again, that is a very weird jump to get to. And now we can understand, for example, let me put this out there. We're going to go over why that's incorrect. But even if it was, right? Because there have been times throughout history where, women marry young. My great grandmother was married at 14 to an older guy, right? And her family was very okay with it. There is the social and political and cultural influence going on, and that's understandable. But to be able to make a jump like that is wild. So we're going to go over why that's incorrect, also. So combating this practice, we have been working with creating a section of Muslims for Progressive Values called Imams for She. And this programs is there to do an alternative understanding of the age of Aisha when she married the Prophet using the following 3 points. So, according to Ibn Kathir, Asma was 10 years older than her younger sister Aisha and was born in the year 595. So we can assume that Aisha was born in the year 605. Asma lived until 100 years old and died in 73 AH, which means that she fled from Medina when she was 27 or 28. In this time, we can assume that Aisha was 17 or 18 when she migrated to Medina. And then Al-Nawawi places the consummation of the marriage between Aisha and the Prophet, peace be upon him, and her as well, in the second year of the Hijra, putting her at 19 or 20 when her marriage was consummated. So, again, we got to do the work, right? We got to do the theological work. We got to do all that stuff. So when you line it up and you get all of these points together, we can get this full picture. What happens is when you get an incorrect reading or dating of something, and then people jump on top of it as an excuse to do something that would be that's immoral, right? That is unacceptable, like child marriage. And then claiming that Islam is the reason why they do it, which again, wild. All right, so the central mission of the feminist hermeneutics process is to develop a reading of the liberation to construct a narrative in favor of social and gender justice. The Quran is the Quran talks about both men and women as being equal in the eyes of God, period. Right? Men and women, regardless, men and women earn the love and the good deeds that they do with Allah equally. It's not like one male good deed is worth more than a female good deed. It doesn't work like that. And we need to make sure that we are actually practicing Islam with those in mind. We can't keep doing this whole like, well, she can't be a scholar and she can't lead a congregation of people because a man has to do that and a man has to do this and a man has to do that and she can't do this legal thing because, a woman is half. Like, we can't keep doing this. We cannot keep doing this. There's a reason why so many people think that Islam and feminism aren't compatible, and it's because of the continuation of these sorts of practices and interpretations. So when we are taking a look at trying to understand it from social and gender justice, what model does this process utilize to critique religious misogyny in an attempt to decolonialize the divine? So, okay, so we want to do this, but how do we do it? Feminist hermeneutics model. So there's 3 sections here that I want to go over, and then let's see, yeah, 2 more on the next. So let's go over 5. So the first one is that it is based on the perspective of women. Again, we need to hear from the people that are practicing this, the people that are affected by this. We need more scholars of diverse backgrounds, and that includes we need more women. Come up, tell us your interpretations, tell us all that stuff. So it emphasizes the importance of the experiences of women as they interpret the Quran, rejects the perceptions men have about women that influence how they interpret the Quran, and considers the role and status of Muslim women in the religion to produce gender-just interpretations. Okay. Second section is that it needs to be framed through the feminist theory. Centers on a framework of gender equality and gender justice, exposes the patriarchal interpretations of Islamic texts that perpetuate inequality and injustices, and departs from any gender bias present in the classical interpretations of the Quran. So one thing that I have heard, people say is that, oh, so you're saying men and women are the same. Well, women can have babies and men can't, and we're different, and we just need to look at this from a biological and a science. Interpreting a text does not require specific body parts other than a brain. It does not, period. And like I said in our last course, it's a learned skill. You can be taught how to do this, and it doesn't matter what your gender is. Anybody can do that, okay? So yes, we need to take a look at that. Number 3, uses historical context. Everything needs to be in context. The moment you bring up a part of Islam that makes even mainstream Muslims uncomfortable. Like if you bring up slavery, they're immediately going to say, context. Well, you have to put it in context. But when you bring up things like gender inequalities, they don't seem to be screaming context. We need context. Historical context helps us to understand it. So focuses on the context of the time and the background of the verse and its revelation, defines verses that identify the situation and condition of 7th century Arabic society and universal values, identifies the importance of reading a text according to current and historical societal norms. Again, just because something was normal societally at the time doesn't mean it is anymore. And that's probably because we have outgrown it as a species and as a society. And that's okay. It's okay to outgrow things. It's okay to learn new things and then adapt to those things. Um, Again, we're not saying change Islam. We're saying that God made all of this, and if we are going to learn more about it, we then need to apply it in our relationship to God. So number 4 applies the when I write, didn't read my own handwriting. Uh, Intertextuality approach. That's what I said. Applies the intertextuality approach. So Rhodes reads each verse according to the themes of the entire text rather than in isolation, compares verses of the Quran to one another to identify how the Quran advocates for justice and recognizes that no interpretation of a verse can ever contradict the Quranic principle of gender equality. So you go into a text, you know what the core principles are, and now we need to say, okay, if this is true, and now we need to take each of these lines, and then how do they relate to each other? How do they relate to the outer world here? And then finally, number 5 prioritizes the monotheistic framework. So recognizes the unity of God and the uniqueness and indivisibility of God, identifies sexism as idolatrous because it deems women creations of God to be imperfect, highlights the importance of Tawhid because no human can be compared to God, and therefore elevating men above women is a violation of Tawhid. A good example of this that I learned in my pre-Islamic days, is in the Bible, for example. Um, they have a section in there about the headscarves, right? Just like, I think it's Second Corinthians, First Corinthians. It's one of the Corinthians. It's in there. I remember reading it a few years ago. And it basically says that like men are the image of God, women are the image of men. And so the reason women in that text section there cover themselves is because of their imperfection, and then the men don't have to because they're closer to being the image of God. We don't have that in Islam. That is not a thing. And by saying that, you know, raising one type of person above another, not only is that like un-Islamic, but like it's saying here, it's idolatrous, comparing one as being closer to God or anything like that. And then also the idea that like women are lesser. When you say that, you're saying here, like it says, that one of the creations of God is somehow imperfect, right? Instead of just seeing the differences and the diversity and the beauty of the creation of God and saying, wow, that's cool. Let's focus on worshiping God and admiring all of God's creation, right? So yes, unification requires all of that equality there. So here's some ethical principles of feminist hermeneutics. So like I said, Tawhid, the oneness of all creation, provides the imperative for the unity of all humankind, right? God made all of us, period, all of us, everywhere, all over the world, everyone. Taqwa, the piety of God, which trumps class, ethnicity, lineage, and ability, and is therefore the only thing that distinguishes humans from one another, right? So we don't judge based on any of that other stuff. It's just, I love that one hadith where it says, like, God doesn't look to your face or your clothes, God looks to your heart. I really like that one. That's right there with the taqwa. Adl, which we talked about, al-Adl, one of the names of Allah, which means justice, right? So justice is the end point after liberation for all is reached, meaning women must be freed from oppression in order for there to be justice for all. When we talk about caliphate, individual responsibility towards God and their creation, wilayat, Mutual collaboration based on what the Quran says about men and women being protectors of each other. Shura, consensus that implies women and men must consult with each other to make decisions rather than simply obeying each other. Zulm, which is the principle of non-oppression, and as we talked about last time, ijtihad, which is the intellectual effort of the individual. So we should all intellectually come to these texts, try to understand them for ourselves. One more page, then we're going to go on to the next section here. So another important thing with the feminist hermeneutics is the recognition of Arabic as a gendered language. So what is a gendered language? There are many, many, many gendered languages in the world. Even in the West, we have like French and Spanish, right? Those are very commonly used ones, and those are gendered as well. What that means is that every noun has a gender. So it's either male or female, even if it's like a chair or a computer, it has a male or female gender attached to it. It's there for grammatical reasons and helps you decide on the endings and the verb tense, how to use it, all of that. It doesn't actually mean that the chair or the computer is a boy or a girl, right? And so what happens here is that if you ask a Muslim, is Allah male or female, they would say neither. Allah is above gender, right? True. Then why is it that we keep saying Allah, he, when we translate it into a non-gendered language? And the reason for that is because if you're going to do a direct translation, the masculine gender is used for the word God, as well as some other, names for God, etc. It's going to get that masculine he on it, not because he male, but he gendered word, which if you are going to actually do a translation for understanding into a non-gendered language, it would make more sense to use a gender neutral pronoun or a gender neutral version of the word Allah than it would. But what happens is it gets translated literally. And so when they translate it literally, you're going to get the masculine word. You're also going to get the masculine word for groups that are mixed gender. This is the same thing, again, like I said, in French and Spanish. If I have a group of 99 women, the group is going to be the female word for group of people. If you have 99 women and one male, it's going to be the masculine word for group, just because the one male is in there. And this is the same thing here. So, for example, in Quran 238, where it says, "O you who believe," the you group there is masculine plural, but it refers to both men and women. So oftentimes when we're reading the Quran and it has been not just translated but interpreted, it tends to be translated and interpreted talking to men about men or masculine groups when really it was just everybody, all genders. So please keep that in mind when we're doing this. We need to understand that the Quran's intention is universal. Ultimately, a feminist hermeneutical approach to the Quran demonstrates that the Quran is compatible with modernity and supports gender equality, right? Individuals need to reread and reinterpret the Quran for themselves to challenge the patriarchal interpretations of the Quran as they have persisted. Yes, it's important to have some kind of educational background to make sure that we are doing, our due diligence. Gosh, these late classes, due diligence when we are doing any of this. If you don't have an understanding on how to interpret a text, it would be difficult, and there's a higher chance that you're gonna misinterpret, right? But the body of Muslims in the world are extremely diverse, and we have to get more people out here from all backgrounds, all genders, to do these interpretations so that we can come to the core truths and not so much just the same types of people, male background, trained at the same schools by the same people, and are told what to say over and over. Because what happens is what we talked about in the last class. If you guys remember the meatloaf thing, right? Where like the girl's like, she sees her mom cut the ends off the meatloaf before putting it into the oven. And she's like, "Mom, why do we do that?" And her mom was like, "I don't know, ask your grandma." "Grandma, why do we do that?" "I don't know, ask your great grandma." "Great grandma, why do you cut the ends off the meatloaf before putting it in the oven?" And she goes, "Because it didn't fit in my pan." right? So we'll just continue to do the same things over and over because that's just the way they're taught. If we don't take the time to sit here and go, wait, why are we doing that? These problems are going to persist. So we need more people, more diverse scholars out there in the world. All right. So we're now going to move on to the second half of our lesson. If you guys want to put in the chat any questions that you have, you can type it over there in the chat. If not, I will go ahead and move on. Give us like 30 seconds. Any questions, comments, concerns before we move on? Okay, doesn't look like we have anything. Okay, second half, here we go. This is hermeneutics for human rights. Okay, not only are we needing to do a feminist reinterpretation of the Quran, right, to even out that equality issue that we have going on here. Again, kind of crazy considering like this half of Muslims are women, right? Yet much less than half of the scholars are women. So we need to focus on the feminism, but we also need to focus on human rights in general across the board, right? Rights for children, rights for all people, rights for people that you know, become Muslims, rights for people that don't want to be Muslims anymore, rights for people that are not Muslims at all, nor do they ever become a Muslim. Humans, period, regardless of race or color or culture or any of that stuff. Okay? So let's talk about how we can do that with our hermeneutics here. So the mission of Muslims with Progressive Values is to create a culture rooted in human rights in Muslim societies. Creating this culture requires a transformation of interpretations of the Quran to ones that fit a globalized world and a diverse Muslim community. Okay, just like we were talking about with that tomato of wisdom. Just because you found a rule that works for you in your situation or where you are does not mean it is a universal rule. I will give you an example here, right? I've had Muslims and imams and scholars come up to me, and the moment they hear I have kids, it's you need to get them in Quranic school and they need to learn how to read the Quran cover to cover. They're going to memorize it and it's just so important and you need to do that and you need to make them pray. And I'm like, guys, both of my kids are disabled. Like, that is not the rules or the experience that we live in our family. It's just not. And so we can't just keep like coming up with this square box and like trying to stick everybody into it. What we need to do is understand these core values. How do we interpret Quran? And then how can we take our certain situation, wherever we are in the world, and connect it back to the Quran and back to God? So we have a very diverse Muslim community. The Muslim community is very diverse already. It might not seem like it sometimes, but it really, really is, which is why we need to get more vocal voices out here. A hermeneutical approach seeks to draw a direct source to the Quran by passing existing exegesis and laws that have been derived from this exegesis. Sometimes this is known as post-Enlightenment hermeneutics, and this is because the context was based on different challenges posed by Muslim societies in the aftermath of the Enlightenment period, particularly the association of universal human rights values and secularism. Many of the cutting off the ends of the meatloaf things we follow nowadays have been around before we started having more civil rights and human rights and all that stuff, but they didn't get updated. So we need to go back and we need to look at everything again. Again, ask why are we doing it that way? What is the reason? And how can it fit now, if it fits at all now? And how can we take what does fit now to better understand the Quran? So sometimes this is known, this is sometimes called, because of Abdullah Said's work, as contextualists, which means that we are contextualizing the Quran in its time and contextualizing it into what we are experiencing today. Okay. So if you're going to do a human rights approach of hermeneutics, you need to follow a few things. The first one is that you need to craft a scientific exegesis of the Quran. You need to offer a feminist reading of the Quran. You need to read the Quran from a literary and historical perspective, and you need to isolate and privilege particular themes. So, exegesis again is just the critical interpretation of a text. This right here, what we just talked about in that list, is why you can grab good-hearted, loving, caring, inspirational, knowledgeable people like, grab Malala, right? Everybody knows her, or grab like a Mufti Menk over here, right? And they're holding the same book as like Islamic extremist type people. We're all holding the exact same book. We don't have different versions. We're all holding the same book. So how do you get those two completely different interpretations and sides? And it's because of these. If you take a literalist translation and you don't put in the historical perspectives, you don't look at it, okay, now I'm going to go in and I'm going to read it again as like a literary piece and try to understand like symbolisms, right? And themes. If I don't go into this saying, okay, this is a liberation theology piece, theological piece, right? It's about liberation theology, and I'm going to read it from that lens. Yeah, you can get a completely different understanding of the book when you do that. You guys probably saw in that uh, video I just did last time about all the different Qurans that I have, right? Like looking at it through different translations and interpretations and reading it again and then rereading it from a different point of view. Just really, every time you read it, you should get something new. If you're really doing it right, every time you read it, you should get something new. Uh, and then let's see, we also have the principle of universal human rights. So when we do the exegesis of the Quran here, we're saying that human rights is a central core part of it. Going into it, like, okay, this is about human rights. Let's read it from there and talk about it from there. Oftentimes, we see this in like the section of the Quran, O mankind, we created you from a single pair of male and female, and made you into nations and tribes that ye may know each other, not that ye may despise each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is he who is the most righteous of you, and Allah has full knowledge and is well acquainted with all things. Right? Everybody knows that line. It's a very famous line. It's a very important line. Because that right there is the core of it all, of the human rights here, right? Where it doesn't matter what makes you different. That's okay. Like that was the point. The whole point was that there was going to be all this diversity. The thing that makes somebody a good person is being a good person, being righteous, being like, hey, I'm going to take care of other people and put people before me, and I'm not going to try to do it to get attention. I might do a bunch of charity or give a bunch of money, and I'm never going to put my name on it. Nobody's ever going to know. Because at the end of the day, I'm just doing it because it makes me happy to know that I'm helping people and because I'm worshiping God by taking care of God's creation over here, right? So if you walk up to somebody, it even says right here in the Quran, if you walk up to somebody and they're dressed differently or they speak differently or they're whatever, the whole point was to be like, wow, that's interesting. Tell me more about yourself, and I'll tell you more about myself, right? To get to know each other. We all need to talk. So this verse declares that piety is the only basis to distinguish between human beings, which scholars over the centuries have interpreted to imply universal human equality. It implies that biological equality of all humans, which then implies the right for all to human dignity. We were all created by God, period, whether you like that person or not. We're all people and we all need to respect each other. Again, you don't have to agree, right? But you do have to treat them as another person. So, universal human rights for all is supported by the last sermon of the prophet, peace be upon him, as well, right? He talks about universal human equality as a core theme. It's also in the Quran. Individuals seeking to read the Quran from a human rights perspective can use intratextuality method to apply it to the other Quranic verses. Intratextuality means how do the pieces or the lines and the chapters within the Quran relate to one another, right? So it's intra, not inter, meaning like multiple texts like Bible versus Quran. Intra, meaning within itself. How do these different lines connect? The next principle we can use when we're doing these hermeneutics for human rights is going to be the principle of reciprocity. In layman's terms, it's the golden rule, right? Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Reciprocity. And I would even go further than that. I would say, do unto others as you would want God to do to you. I love that quote. I forgot where I saw it, but it was like, you should forgive others as fast as you would want God to forgive you, right? There's that Hadith Qudsi about I am as my servant sees me, or I am as my servant believes me to be, which can be seen oftentimes the way people treat each other when they are religious is that they are treating each other the way they think God is going to treat them. If they're hateful and they have no mercy and stuff, they honestly truly believe in their heart that if they did that stuff, God wouldn't forgive them. It comes from a place of fear and it comes from a place of feeling like they themselves aren't worthy of forgiveness, wouldn't be forgiven. Whereas when you see those people who are very loving and kind, even, through their faith, they see God as, you know, the kind of God that is going to be merciful, right? Be compassionate. And if you would want God to forgive you for something, you should easily forgive somebody else for it, right? So that's this principle of reciprocity. The prophet said, one of you does not believe until he loves for his brother or sister what or as he loves for himself, right? Do unto others as you would want for yourself. I made a note up here because I looked this up a few years ago. I got into a bit of an argument or debate. It was more of an argument with a scholar. He was a Saudi scholar. And he had been raised on and trained in that fire and brimstone, fear, anger part of complying with Islam. And I was very confused because, again, like I'm a reader. I read. I've read the Quran like dozens of times, you know what I mean? And it kind of felt like when I'm teaching a class and I can tell which students read the book and which students didn't. And he said something, and I was like, did we read the same book? So I looked up the numbers to make sure. He told me that the word like fear, right, was in there more than love. And I was confused because I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean we should fear before we love? Like, no, love, compassion, all that's in there way more. So I looked it up. So the Rahamim root, right, which comes into play when we say like Al-Rahman, right, or Al-Rahim for mercy, compassion, all that, all of its derivatives as well. That those roots are in there 339 times. Rahim specifically is 227 times. And then if we look at Qaf, which is fear, is in there 124 times. So it's actually in there less than half. Twice as much love, twice as much compassion and mercy, right, than fear. So if we're going to take a look at this stuff, we need to remember Al-Iman, faith, right? Al-Ithar, altruism, Al-Nasiha, goodwill, love for the sake of God, justice and fairness, all of that stuff. By understanding these values as core principles, right, in there more than anything else, the principle of reciprocity, then we can better understand the Quran from this perspective, right? And then we also have the principle of full personhood. Full personhood. Quran 238, verily I am going to create a Khalifa, caretaker, or trustee on the earth. So a lot of people are going to use this and they're going to say, okay, we need to put somebody in charge, and that person's job is to make everybody do the thing that they're supposed to do. That is what a lot of people think that having the power or to be entrusted to take care of people means. They think it means it is my job then to make them do the thing. However, let's think about this from another perspective. Trusteeship is the responsibility of all humans, and to fulfill this trusteeship as our life's purpose, an individual's human rights, if they are denied This impacts their existence and their ability to care for themselves or the other individuals around them. So if an individual's human rights are taken away and they are denied, we are denying them the possibility of fulfilling their responsibility towards God. We are here to help take care of each other, to care for God's creation, right? And if we don't have the free will to do that. We don't have the capacity to do that because somebody else is out here making it so that we can't take care of ourselves, take care of the people we love, take care of our family, take care of our tribe, take care of our whoever. You are denying them the ability to do that. So let's go over the 12 core human rights, and then we should be, I think, pretty much done for the night. Yep, got our list I got of our 12 core human rights, and then we'll be done. So we're going to come to the Quran, and we're going to say, okay, I need to ground myself in human rights as I read this. Which also, FYI, reminds me of another important quote that I didn't fully understand until the last few years. Because I was raised on it from a different interpretation, right? My super Catholic family and the priests and everybody loved this one, which was if you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. This is an important thing, but the textual way that they were using it is that if you don't believe what I tell you, then you're going to fall for anything. And that's not what that's supposed to mean. What it's supposed to mean is that if you don't have those core values, it will be easy to get lost into something you don't believe in. You need to remember your core values before you approach anything. Because if you come into it, as many new Muslims do, and Muslims that were raised, in some of these more traditional Islamic households, if you come into it saying that I must believe what I am told, or I will misunderstand and fall for something wrong, then that isn't tied to a core value, right? And then your values are going to become what somebody else tells you that your values are. And it'll feel wrong. You'll know that you're doing that if you start to do stuff and you're like, this feels icky. This doesn't feel like me, right? So we need to tie to those core values before we approach anything, and that includes faith. So let's look at some core human rights that we see in the Quran. Again, we're not making these up. These were already in there, but make sure that we are like anchored to those before we start letting people tell us how we need to practice. So first was right to life. So this is from 6:151. And do not kill the person which God has forbidden except in justice. That is what he enjoined you. And of course, obviously, in a progressive interpretation, the right to life here is like, unless they're trying to murder you. Unless they are actively trying to kill you, you don't get to just kill people. God made them. God made everybody. God made all those people you don't like, right? Right to respect. We have honored the children of Adam and carried them in the land and the sea, and we have provided for them of all good things. 1770. So, right to respect Allah again. Made all people, gave this world to all people, provided all the good things, the foods, the drinks, the shade and the sun, the everything, the joy, the family, for everybody. When it says children of Adam, it means all people, all humans. Right to justice. So we have Surah 5, Ayah 8. So 5:8, we have, oh, you who acknowledge, stand for God as witnesses for justice, and let not the hatred towards a people make you avoid being just. Be just, for it is closer to awareness, and be aware of God. God is expert over what you do. Allah specifically warns us in the Quran not to let hatred rule you. If you are doing something out of anger or you're doing something out of hatred, you're not doing it for the right reason. And I know it can be really easy to become motivated by hate and anger. I have also had my own personal tragedies, where somebody I knew was murdered by somebody else I knew. And it becomes easy to turn that into hate and anger and revenge. But regardless of what it is that happened, if your next actions, your next words, your next movement through the world comes from a place of hate and anger, you're doing it for the wrong reason. Period. All right to freedom. So we have Sarah 3, I 79. It is not for human that God would give him the book, the authority, and the prophethood. Then he would say to the people, be servants to me rather than to God. Rather, be devotees to what you've been taught of the book and what you studied. Right to freedom. So this is to not just follow one specific person. This is to follow God, right? And we need to better understand God, we need to be able to study and understand it ourselves too. We should be seeking knowledge. Right to privacy. We have Surah 24, Ayah 27. Oh, you who acknowledge, do not enter any homes except your own unless you are invited and you greet the people in them. Right to privacy. You can't just be barging into people's houses and telling them that they're doing something wrong. Okay. I don't know anybody who does that, but I'm sure there are people that do. And let's just don't do that. Right. Everybody is working on their own stuff and they need the privacy and the right to do that in their own time, right? We shouldn't be constantly policing each other all the time. We don't know what another person's going through. Yes, it's great to advise somebody, but you can't advise with wisdom. If you don't even know that person, you don't know what they just went through this morning or what they're personally going through in their life, you know? Um, for example, an example of this, right, is that you don't just go ask people about why they're doing the thing that they're doing. Instead, it says here, greet them, talk to them, get to know them, right? I went to what I found out was a pretty conservative masjid. And I come from a non-Muslim background with a non-Muslim household. I come from the kind of so not Muslim people that I had a family member who said, if I come around wearing any kind of headscarf, I shouldn't because I will be shot. Okay. So that kind of, right? So like when I wear clothes that are conservative or modest, tends to be modest, but not so far modest that I'm walking around in like a burqa. You know what I mean? So I go to this conservative masjid and I was nervous to go there and I really wanted to, talk to other Muslims and not feel so alone and find a group. And I had this abaya like cover thing, and it goes down to just like right above my ankles. It wasn't all the way to the floor, which apparently was the problem. And a sister greeted me, and I was so excited. And I was like, hey, salam, assalamu alaikum, all that. And she was um, like, you've heard of prayer clothes, right? I'm just right. So of course she doesn't know that, where I had come from and how hard I had been trying and how I get, you know, I get the hate at me just for wearing like a modest looking outfit sometimes. So right to privacy, we don't need to be all up in each other's business. Instead, we just need to greet each other and get to know each other. And if somebody just want to talk to you about something going on in their life, that is okay too, right? They need to work on it themselves. We have a couple more here. We have right to protection from slander, backbiting, and ridicule. So this is Surah 49, Ayah 11. O you who acknowledge, let not people ridicule other people, for they may be better than them. Nor shall any women ridicule other women, for they may be better than them. Nor shall you mock one another, or call each other names. Evil indeed is the reversion to wickedness after attaining acknowledgement. Anyone who does not repent, then these are the transgressors. Um, I don't even know what to say about that one. That one is just so, it is so obvious, and yet it is so ingrained into the majority of societies that sometimes we don't even notice we're doing it, and we really need to be diligent about that. We need to be diligent about the way we talk about other people. Because again, we don't know where they stand with God. We don't know what they're doing in their private lives. We just talked about that privacy. We don't know how hard they're trying or what they're working on or the stuff we don't know about them, right? Not necessarily our place to ask either. Like that's them, but don't immediately assume things about people and just tear them to pieces, really. You've probably heard that common saying, like, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. That too. Okay, just focus on the positives. And if you don't have anything positive to say about that person, then just change the subject, right? Right to good life. This is Surah 16, Ayah 97. Whoever does good work, be he male or female, this was the verse I was talking about earlier. Be he male or female, and is an acknowledger, we will give him a good life, and we will reward them their dues with the best of what they used to do. Okay. Men, women, everybody's equal. If they're good people, they will earn the blessings from Allah. And that is all there is to that, right? All right. Right to acquire knowledge. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more. Here we go. Sorry, I know I'm kind of rambling today. Right to acquire knowledge. This is Surah 9, Ayah 122. It is not advisable for those who acknowledge to march out in their entirety. For every battalion that marches out, let a group remain to study the system and warn their people when they return to them. Perhaps they will be cautious. Here saying this is that concept of this kind of reflects back on the concept of a jihad. I I find it really interesting how many people really try to put into that whole, like it says here, like the army and the battalion and the fighting for what is right in the physical sense, when that is literally called the lesser jihad. That is the only if necessary jihad. That is the not as important jihad, because the greater jihad is the jihad in yourself, the fight for being the best version of yourself, gaining knowledge, being able to apply that knowledge, being able to understand that knowledge and live your best life and do your best in all situations, right? That is the most important thing. And so, yeah, even it says here, right? So it's like, hey, yes, people going out and fighting, but you know what's more important is knowledge. And then when they get back, maybe you can teach them knowledge and they'll be less likely to go start being aggressive. I love that. Right to leave one's homeland under oppressive conditions. Islam is all about like taking care of people. It's that liberation theology we talked about, right? The whole like story of Moses, right? So we have Surah 4, 98 through 100, or Ayah 98 through 100. Except for those men, women, and children who were oppressed and could not devise a plan nor could be guided to a way, for these perhaps God will pardon them. God is pardoner, forgiving. Whoever emigrates in the cause of God will find in the land many spoils and a bounty. Whoever leaves his home emigrating to God and his messenger, then is overcome by death. His reward has fallen to God, and God is forgiving and compassionate. Meaning that God made the whole world for everybody. And if a person finds themselves in oppressive conditions, that we should support each other and care for each other and finding a safe, less oppressive free space for everyone. You know, they're emigrating for the sake of God in that, right? God made everybody, going right back to that. And so everybody is here for a reason. Everybody is one of God's creation, and we need to take in refugees. If they are trying to flee something that is out of their control, right? We need to take them in and care for them because we're all God's people, period. Okay. God made the whole world for everyone. We don't get to just draw imaginary lines and just be like, hey, like this part is like my map though, and then this one's like yours. Because God made the entire world for all people. Okay. Right to develop one's aesthetic sensibilities and enjoy the bounties. We have Sarah 732, I 32, sorry. Say who's forbidden the nice things that God has brought forth for his servants and the good provisions. Say They are in this worldly life for those who acknowledge, and they will be exclusive for them on the day of resurrection. We thus explain the signs for those who know. So wonderful, beautiful things, again, in the world were put here by God for everybody. I often like to remind myself when I look out at the world that God made enough like food and water and space for everybody. And the only reason people aren't getting it is because of other people. We are restricting each other. And we are telling each other that, well, you can't have this, it's mine, or you can't have this thing that makes you happy because God made everything and we need to share it with the everyone as well. Right to sustenance, which goes back to this. So Surah 11, Ayah 6. There's not a creature on earth except that its provision is due from God. He knows their habitat and their depository. All is in a clear record. When we look at biology and the ecosystems all over the world, everything lives off and in relation to everything else, from the plants to the bugs to the animals to, right, the seasons and everything else. Like I said, the system was made to work for everybody, but unfortunately what happens is that we cut people off from sustenance, right? We're like, no, you can't have this fruit because it's closer to my house than yours. It was for everybody, right? All right, and then finally, right to work. So 4, Ayah 32, for the men in a portion of what they gained, and for the women is a portion of what they gained. So Allah made everybody different, but also Allah made us all to do great things. And very, very few things in the world require a specific gendered body type to do them. The majority of things can be done by men or women, or non-binary, or trans, or whoever. People, humans. Whether they're doctors or pizza makers or, car mechanics or whatever that is. We have the right to work in whatever it is that God made us good at and seek our own provisions. So, while these 12 universal principles are derived from the analysis of just one scholar, they highlight the possibility of deriving human rights from the Quran. These are all specific to the Quran. Again, we didn't just pull them out of thin air. They were already there. Ultimately, though, a human rights and progressive approach emphasizes that the interpretation of the verse is informed by the individual going through the interpretation. Therefore, it is on you, the reader, to read the Quran for yourself. That article I brought up at the very beginning of this class on New Age Islam, I went to their about section, and there was like a paragraph there that like really struck me, and it said that these all come from different scholars of different backgrounds and different writers and everybody else. And it says that we believe in our audience's ability to learn and decipher, right from wrong, to work through these interpretations and to understand them, right? Um, Recently my friend shared that quote with me that said, like, if you're afraid that books are going to change someone's thinking, you're not afraid of books, you're afraid of thinking. And I really like that one too, because I'm just like, look, you could hand me a book on like Nazism or something, and it's not going to turn me into a Nazi because I know that that's wrong regardless. By limiting people's access to information or books or literature or movies or whatever you want to insert information source, um, you're not protecting them. You're not stopping them from finding truth. They can find truth on their own as long as you teach them the critical thinking skills to approach any piece of text, regardless. So don't be afraid to go read and learn. And if people are making you feel like you can't do that, just remember these. Remember those human rights. Like God gave us a brain and we need to go use it, all of us. Because the more we learn from each other and meet each other's tribes and everybody's experiences, the more we can understand each other, the more we can understand God. And that's the way it's supposed to be. That God made it like that on purpose. So, That is the end of this class. I'm going to go ahead and end our recording here, but I just want to say thank you to those who watched, listened, and especially those who are here live. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will have more videos coming out from MPB soon. Inshallah, I will see you guys in the next video. See.